Thanks very much for coming in, and thanks for your work. Just to start with the Friends of the Earth and Mr. Machiavelli, this word unabated, it's a very problematic word because I think it's a word which is about change without change, pretending that actually we can continue. We don't need to stop using fossil fuels. We don't need to leave them in the ground. Could you tell me? I mean, this all relies on carbon capture and storage technology. What is the current status of that technology? Is it proven to work at the sort of scale that would be necessary to have an impact in terms of abating greenhouse gas emissions from the use of fossil fuels?
Will I come in straight away?
Yeah.
So basically my understanding is that it is essentially not either not commercially viable or not technically viable, or hasn't been proven at any scale. And first of all, thank you, Deputy, for the question. I think what's also important to remember here is that carbon capture and storage is not new. It's been discussed, and there's been actual supports from other states for the best part of 20 years. And I don't want to give the impression that, support for new technologies is somehow inappropriate. That would obviously be ridiculous. But the point is, a reliance on these technologies, while at the same time we have ongoing investments and expansion of fossil fuels, would be entirely contradictory and undermine the entire process. And in terms of the COP, the real risks around the use of abatement language is that we're concerned about an essentially a get-out-of-jail-free card, or a loophole being built into the text from the very get-go. I should emphasise that the EU position is not ignorant to these concerns. It notes that it should be limited to, this is abatement now, to hard to abate sectors, essentially only for certain processes. And there are other relevant caveats as well. But our position is that there's no room for this from the get-go, and that a text or the language, or this type of formulation essentially constitutes too many risks. And ultimately, while it does seem likely from what we've heard on the negotiating positions of other blocs, that there may be a strong commitment around renewables, a call for perhaps tripling of renewable capacity, doubling of energy efficiency. We would be very concerned coming away from that if it was limited to that text without any reference at all to the fossil fuel side of things. And I just wanted to really briefly reference this separately now. My colleagues have provided really detailed information on recommendations regarding the Loss and Damage Fund. I think it would be appropriate if the committee could actually direct these issues at the Minister for Foreign Affairs or relevant government ministers, whether it's on finance or public expenditure as well. But ultimately, it's superb that we have engagement by this committee, but purely in terms of responsibilities, and also given that my understanding is that the Minister for Foreign Affairs will also be present at the COP. I think it would be appropriate that they're directed at their offices as well.
Thanks a lot. Just following up on that, I mean, it is a problem. I accept that there are kind of qualifications on the EU negotiating position, but the fact that the EU, as one of the more ambitious global north blocs, is putting such a thing as their, like, this is our common position, is a problem. Just a question in relation to that. Say in relation to Ireland, is Ireland bound only to argue for that EU common position, or can it go further and say we need complete phase out of fossil fuels at COP?
That's a good question. I would say, formally, the EU negotiating position is the EU negotiating position. There are limitations to how much further individual EU member states could go beyond the EU negotiators who take responsibility. Part of this ultimately sort of comes down to the procedural negotiation process of the UN itself, which I won't even attempt to go into. But it's important to note that Ireland is a member of the High Ambition Coalition, which did not in any sense raise this issue around abated fossil fuels, and Ireland's negotiators do play an important role. It's not simply that we are we can't engage on these issues, while ultimately it's the EU negotiator who would take the lead. So I think when it comes to the response to the global stocktake, and there's also other relevant work streams on mitigation and just transition, there are opportunities for Ireland to make this case.
Thanks a lot. If we could just ask a question of Ms. Balfe. Very striking, the figure you have in your opening statement. Investment managers registered in Ireland held $6.2 billion in bonds and shares attributable to fossil fuels and agribusiness in the global south. And then you go on to make the point, I think very strongly, very clearly and very accurately, it is completely by design that Ireland acts as a channel for global institutional investors to profit from their fossil fuel investments in the global south. And you highlight what is a very severe policy incoherence, where Ireland, relatively speaking, in the global north speaks in relatively progressive language on these issues, but then actually acts as a conduit for billions and billions of dollars to go to destroy our planet, for which the poorest people in the world pay the price for it. Just like one aspect of that, obviously, is the call, which I think is very strong, to update the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act to ensure that at the very least no public money is ending up, which it currently is, you highlight. Can I just ask, I presume, or it's kind of a question, have you raised that with the government, with the department? What kind of response have you got? Is there an open door, do you think, to amending that, or are you getting pushback?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. I mean, on the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act and the entire findings and the research that we published, we have shared those with the relevant ministers. The response was unclear in terms of what the government will actually do, but one of the things that we're committed to doing is to bring forward this discussion and have the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act. We're working with Deputy Thomas Pringle's office to put that before for further discussion at the Oireachtas. And I hope that there wouldn't be much resistance to this, because I think the need is clear about how and why the Fossil Fuel Act could be strengthened. I think the question of Ireland's economic model is a more challenging one politically to address. And I think, this is something that I think the government has to really look at. And this is where a whole of government approach is so fundamentally important, and engagement with the Department of Finance, the wider kind of government. Because this issue of policy inquiries, we can make all the pledges we want on climate finance and loss and damage, but if we are undermining that through our economic model, and the level of money that is flowing through Ireland is really shocking. And I hope there would be a way that the government could look at this. I don't think the government is going to change its overall economic model, but specifically looking at the impact of fossil fuels and agribusiness on the global south that's been channeled through Ireland. I would hope that this would merit discussion in the light of the climate crisis that we face. And it's not to say that the economic model shouldn't be adjusted, because very reputable bodies have criticised Ireland's tax model for its devastating impact and undermining the ability of developing countries to fund public services, to address poverty, to address development. But now this research reveals the added dimension of climate change within that. And it isn't going to be politically easy, but the level of crisis and the level of leadership that is required from Ireland to address the climate crisis is absolutely imperative.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.